that's my expense for this month. By the time it's November, it's free.
But then I tell myself that I'm going to use it at least on 100 days of the year, and then next year, and then next year.
How do you strike a balance between what you want and then also savings?
I'm not splurging, I'm just going to be using something for a long time, so I'm investing in a way.
My entire year's cost in India gets spent in just a few days of buying those newspapers overseas.
They knew how to save, they don't know how to spend.
In the younger generation, there's a lot more focus on self-care.
The other day, I saw this lovely jacket. It cost 12,000 rupees. Now, normally I'd say that it's a little expensive, but then I got to thinking, I use jackets very often. I'm going to use that jacket at least once a month for the next 12 months. That's just 1,000 rupees per month. And what's more, the jacket is on 30% discount right now. I absolutely had to buy it, right? Right? This is exactly how a lot of young people think. You've probably heard of it. A concept called girl math went viral during the pandemic because of a social media video. It is something that has been embraced by millions, but it is also a concept that has been scorned and made fun of. And by the way, there is also boy math. This is Moneywise on NDTV Profit, and I'm Mathew. On this show, it is going to be my endeavor to understand this concept and discuss how it relates to managing money. To help me understand it, I have with me three of my lovely colleagues. From the left to right, I have Charu, I have Yukta, and I have Tanvi. Thank you so much for consenting to do this. And I wanted to do this because I want to make it very clear at the start. I do not want to interpret this. I want to understand it. So one of you start and explain what this concept of girl math is and how it relates to you. Yukta, you want to start?
Okay, so simply put, girl math is just justifying your expenses. But to be clear, it does not have anything to do with like serious expenses like buying a house. It has stuff to do with gratification. So for example, my version of girl math is buying slightly pricier makeup just so that I don't, like makeup that I'm used to, so that I don't use another brand, and what if like that gives me infection? So then I have to go to a dermatologist and incur like a lot of costs. So might as well just buy the pricier makeup and sort of deal with that. So that's my justification.
Okay, and that is your girl math. So
yeah,
what that means is that everybody has their own concept of girl math. Charu, is that how it works?
Definitely. For some people, makeup is a must-have. For other people, they want to splurge on clothes. Some people want to buy concert tickets, which are way beyond their means. Currently, if I give you an example, for example, I am buying a Hermes bag. I cannot afford it just like that, but I splurge all of my savings on it. But then I tell myself that I'm going to use it at least on 100 days of the year, and then next year, and then next year. So you can just say that I'm going to be using it for 300 days. Just divide the cost by 300. So I'm going to feel that, okay, this is my maths. I'm not splurging. I'm just going to be using something for a long time. So I'm investing in a way.
You're investing in a way.
Yeah.
Tanvi, does this only relate to girls, or is this simply a concept that is emerged where people are putting a tag to it? But you've seen other people do this as well, males.
Yeah, I think we are just getting a tag now. It has been, it is just something that we have practiced for so long that we have never noticed it.
Okay.
But now, because of the trend, we are noticing it.
Give me an example.
So I call this my mom math.
Your mom math. Okay.
So whenever I used to buy makeup, I used to buy it at the start of the month. The moment my salary used to be credited, I used to be like, okay, now I'm going to buy the makeup I want. My mom told me, don't do that. First, you get done with all your expenses of the month. Your electricity bill, your rent, and everything else. And by the end of the month, whatever money you've left, now you use that money to buy things that you want.
Okay.
So you're done with your main expenses. And now what is left is the money that you have saved, bit of it. Call it savings, and now use that money to splurge. So that is the mom math that is now I'm using.
Okay, so that's an interesting concept. But there's a lot more to this, Yukta, right? It's about how you view cash. It's about looking at discounts. Can you explain these varied concepts?
Okay, so I have an example. So imagine I want to buy, let's say, a watch. Okay, that's a very gender neutral thing. Everyone likes watches, right? So for example, there's a watch on sale at like 60% off. Okay, or actually, you know what? Let's just do seasons. There's a coat on sale for like 50% off. It's summer.
Right.
So it doesn't really make sense for me to buy that coat in summer.
right.
I won't use it instantly. But it's going to be at full cost in the winter. So I'm actually saving 50% of that cost when I buy it in the summer.
And there's also sunk cost. How does that work?
Okay, so sunk cost is, okay, for example, I am buying something right now, like let's say a concert ticket, okay? There's some artist that I really like, the concert is in like November, but I have to like spend maybe 10K on a ticket right now. That's my expense for this month. By the time it's November, it's free. That concert ticket is basically free to me. So at that time, even if I decide not to go, or even if I'm sick, or even if it's just more financially viable to not leave my house at that time, it's a sunk cost. It's already gone.
So you
it's
don't feel
not-
guilty about it?
I'm not feeling guilty about it because I'm not getting that money back either way. It's a sunk cost.
Okay. So would you say that it is the removal of guilt from a transaction, Charu? Normally, and the reason I ask this is, and I know that generations, the gap between generations is narrowing very sharply. And so the way that one generation thinks about money is not necessarily how the other generation does. And there is often judgment, which is not necessarily the right thing to do, because everybody is allowed to think of their money the way that they want to think about their money. So would you say that you want to experience something, or you want a certain product that you feel that you deserve, and you want to remove the idea of guilt from that, and so you find a way to justify it?
See, I always used to feel very guilty about going on vacations because they used to be very
Right.
expensive. So what I have started doing is I would book a vacation 4 months in advance, like you were talking about the concert ticket. And when I'll finally have my leaves and I'll be going on that vacation and, you know, using those amenities that I've paid for in advance, I'll feel that it's all free and I'm just
Right.
enjoying it. It's not true, well, but it's something that is in my mind because I want premiumization. But at the moment, I'm going to feel very guilty about spending so much on a premium product when I know that I'm not making that much. So I'll save up, do it in advance, and then use that service 4 months later and feel like it's free.
Okay. Have you guys heard of the concept of boy math? So from what I have read, it emerged from girls themselves. Women came up with the concept of boy math. Explain this to me.
Tanvi,
Who's
you
going to
wanna
take
go?
it?
You go ahead.
Okay, so when girl math became a trend, a lot of women started owning up to it. They were like, yeah, you know what, we do it and we're proud of it. We're justifying it to ourselves. We're not really justifying it to anyone else. It's like Charu said, right? I want all those luxuries, but I don't really want to have that guilt attached to it, that I'm spending more than I'm earning. So we started owning up to it, and then a certain section of men also started scorning it and making fun of it, like, oh, of course, women are very frivolous with their spending. But then essentially what men also do sometimes with their expenses is exactly this.
The same thing.
Yeah.
But they spend on other things. They spend on tech. They spend on
Yeah.
games. They spend on a PS5 maybe.
What is the difference between me spending 20,000 on a nice like pair of heels and like maybe a person spending it on some tech or a game even?
Yeah.
So because I'm justifying it with the number of users and they are justifying it with the number of times they'll play. So it's
Sure.
essentially the same thing.
Okay, finding ways to justify it. Okay. So I have actually asked a lot of people in the run-up to this conversation. I must confess that I'm terrified at this juncture and hoping that I will not be trolled. But I asked women around the newsroom, and 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 have said that they actually use this concept. Does that surprise you?
No.
None of you, Charu?
Not really. Actually, you know what? At the end of the day, I don't really think it's girl math or boy math or it has anything to do with gender. We are just young people who are making a certain amount of money and we want the luxuries that our seniors are also enjoying. So we are just doing whatever we can to enjoy it and, you know, experience it. Now we can call it girl math, boy math, anything to, you know, basically separate the guilt out of it, but it has nothing to do with gender. My guy friends or, you know, the boys and the men around in my life have been spending so much on PS5 or really nice pair of shoes, or they will, you know, rent the best car on Zoom car to drive around in Goa, which is something not really understandable to me, but I understand that it is giving them happiness. So it has nothing to do with gender. It is just wanting premium things.
Fantastic. Last question, and then we will bring in a financial planner to talk about this concept, because obviously they've studied it in a different manner, right? I'm very curious about that conversation. But the last question to the three of you, I know that you've started saving, part of it because you've been told it's a great idea to save, and hopefully because you've been engaged in the work that we've been doing on this channel. Do you at all feel that you don't need to save for something, because that's something that emerged from the pandemic, right? Why worry about something that is 30 years down the line? Who knows what's going to happen? Tanvi?
No, I think we all need to save in some way or the other, because as we grow old, our needs are changing.
Sure.
Right? I'm certainly not looking forward to the things that I was looking forward to when I was in college.
Sure.
Right? Right now, I personally want to take a trip to South Korea, but that was not something that I had in mind
Right.
when I was my final year of college.
Okay.
So savings are important, but I think the girl math thing or the boy math thing comes in like, first of all, high inflation at the moment, right?
Yeah.
And then your salary is not, you're not able to spend or address your needs or desires in the salary that you get in a high inflation atmosphere.
Right.
So in that, how do you strike a balance between what you want, chasing those little desires?
That's very difficult to do.
Yeah, and then also saving.
Sure.
So I think, yes.
So the priority, would you say, is sometimes tilted towards that gratification, and maybe to a certain extent saving takes a back seat? Is that it?
I think
No, please go ahead.
I think what's happened after the pandemic is a lot of the plans that people had, right? And a lot of, as Tanvi said, priorities changed. So I think because we saw our parents save up so much, and then like they didn't have the chance to spend.
Sure.
They don't know how to spend.
Yeah.
Right? They knew how to save, they don't know how to spend.
That is an important
So
concept.
I
yes.
think what happened is we saw that and we're like, okay, we don't want to do that. We want to enjoy, but of course, saving is important. But we also do want to enjoy, because what if there's another pandemic? What if there's like a crisis? We don't know.
You never know.
You never know. Okay, so on that very interesting and poignant note, I'm going to close this leg of the conversation. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me and for explaining this to me.
Thank you.
Okay, so that sets the context very nicely for this next leg, which is to speak to the financial expert and see what he thinks about this way of spending or way of managing money. Joining me now is Vishal Dhawan, the founder of Plan Ahead Wealth Advisors. Vishal, thanks so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
So I ensured that you could hear that part of the conversation because I wanted you, like me, to get a glimpse into the thinking of the next generation, Gen Z, not necessarily the next generation, but now the prevalent generation, right? What did you think?
So I think justification of spending has always been a brain thing, right? So everyone's always had lesser resources than what they wanted to spend. It's just that the way that people have justified it across generations has often been different.
Have you had examples of that?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I have this weakness for newspapers, and I've had it since when I was a kid. So, when I travel overseas, I actually always want to pick up a newspaper, and it costs $5, $6. And not just because I'm a financial planner, but just because it's normal, everyone does a mathematical conversion of multiplying it by 80 or 85 or whatever currency.
86 now.
Or 86, right. And then you're like, oh my God, this newspaper costs 500 rupees. And you have a coffee which costs 600 rupees.
Right.
And I justify it by saying that, you know what, but a newspaper gives me so much knowledge that it's very, very justifiable. So wherever I go, I keep buying newspapers.
Right.
And when you think back at it, my entire year's cost in India gets spent in just a few days of buying those newspapers overseas. Clearly not the same amount of knowledge, but in my head, I've sort of convinced myself that, that's a learning thing. Even though I know on my phone, I can log in and see that same newspaper online every day that I'm in India or overseas for free. Absolutely. So this is the version of math that I apply, and I justify that spending. But when I do the same thing with my children, they'd say, hey, the coffee at $6 is way more worth than the newspaper at $5.
Yeah.
And therefore, it just is different.
I mean, there are examples galore, right? People will say they would buy a coffee at a coffee store in a mall, but they would say that it's justified because the ambience of the mall and the experience of walking around in the mall and meeting people, it's all added into the cost of that coffee. The experience is part of the coffee. So you find ways to talk about it. But like you're saying, it's not a new concept. People have thought about it and used this a lot. But what struck me is that in my parents' generation, what I have realized is when I speak to them about, say, taking a vacation now that my dad is retired, and saying, why don't you've got so much money that you've saved up. Both of your children are working and self-sufficient. Use this, go to the US for a month, or go to Australia for a month, or take a vacation. And they say, no, it's too expensive. So they've conditioned themselves to think, Vishal, that they can't afford something, whereas they actually can. This is the opposite of that. You're saying you deserve something, you want to consume it, or you want to experience it, and you're front-ending that spend. Do you think that that is what it is?
Absolutely. So I think there's clearly between those two generations that you're referring to, one generation has grown up with shortages and deficits all the time, and they were always trying to balance the books. And clearly, as you went about balancing the books, you suddenly lost the ability to necessarily know how much you can afford to spend. Because all of a sudden, because the children became self-sufficient, you now had the ability. In fact, we see this happen all the time with our client families where children live overseas. The parents live here. A flight to the US is extremely tiring when you're old, especially. You get there and you have jet lag, you have knee pain, you have all kinds of problems. You can well afford a business class ticket, even though those prices have gone up substantially, but you don't do it because you wonder why I would pay 3 times more for a ticket, because ultimately I'm still going to land at the same airport in the US.
It's guilt.
And it's guilt, absolutely. Whereas in the younger generation, there's a lot more focus on self-care and therefore mental well-being, how this helps me become a better person, do things better, etc.
Gets a lot more attention.
Absolutely.
A better product.
Absolutely. So I think there's a larger focus on well-being as a concept, which is prevalent today. And I think it's a very powerful concept as long as you don't go overboard through that process.
What is the definition of going overboard, Vishal?
So I think for each person, as long as they realize that there are these, elements of what I would call preferences, right? Some people might refer to them as quirks. I just say they're preferences because everyone has their own sort of pleasure point in terms of what they like to spend on. And therefore, what you end up doing is you start asking yourself, saying that, okay, by spending on this a little more, what am I going to spend on a little less so that I'm balanced in terms of my finances?
Yeah.
As long as I'm able to do that, it works well. I don't have to get stressed out. I don't have to feel guilty. I don't have to do any other math. I mean, there are a few examples that I hear from people. There are people who tell me that, when they spend in cash,
it's free.
It's free.
Yeah.
Because the bank balance remains the same.
I've heard that, yes.
Or
if you get a refund.
Or if you get a refund, it's much
earning
cheaper.
money.
Yes, or maybe it's even earning money. It goes to another extreme, right? Or let's say, when you're upgrading your phone, you're upgrading it because you have higher resale value on the phone. So I think there are all kinds of ways that people justify this. But at the end of the day, as long as you're being balanced in your approach, you're not taking on unnecessary debt in the process, you're not getting trapped out there, those are important elements to keep in mind.
We need to talk about that because a lot of the times, because of the imbalance in the amount that you have and the amount that you want to spend exists, to bridge that gap, you are using a credit card or you're using a personal loan, unsecured loan, high cost often. Is there a danger of falling into a debt trap?
Very much. I think a lot of what you spend also does some sort of social signaling very often. And what happens is it's hard to sort of downgrade that social signal. And therefore, if you started off doing it on debt, you run the risk that you could end up in a situation where you need to continue it so that you can keep up with the impression that you've created.
And before you realize it, the debt is ballooned to a point where you can't manage it. You can't manage the EMI payments.
Absolutely, because you may have also projected that my income will grow at a certain rate, the economy slows down, there is stress in your job, you don't get a variable pay, all kinds of other elements could come in. Or you could have something happening in your family, like a large expense which you hadn't planned for. So I think there's lots of risks that you run by front-ending your expenses, in the same way as you run risks by back-ending it too much, because you might realize that you don't live long enough to enjoy that money at all.
So is there the golden question then, and I suppose the $1 million question is there a middle ground? Is there the best of both worlds? And is there a way to set aside money for the future that a lot of young people say we don't even know about? So why should we bother about something that is so far off that we don't even know if the world will exist? Is there a middle ground, Vishal?
So I think at every extreme, two things can happen, right? So let's take a situation where someone says, I may not live tomorrow, and therefore let me live it up. In contrast, you could have a situation where someone's planning or thinking that he'll live to 80 and he lives to 100. So there are extremes on both sides. And I think whenever you're thinking about the future, it's important to be able to find the middle ground, saying that, okay, what's the highest probability event that's going to happen? Rather than working with the extreme probabilities. What's the chances that someone who's 25 is not going to be in the world tomorrow? It's a very low probability.
Sure.
What's the chances that someone's going to live to 100? Again, it's not a very high probability. Yeah. So what you need to find is you need to find balance everywhere, because ultimately either whatever you plan for, you'd either have too little money or you'd have too much money.
And you won't know what to do with it.
And you won't know what to do with it. And maybe your children will just have anyways their own so much money that they will also think that it's not going to really change my life.
Okay, so is there a way for young people to do both? So I have always exhorted people because I started too late. And I think there's a tendency as well there, Vishal, because I know now that I should have started at 22, but I didn't start till I was 29. And so I want other people to start when they're 23 or 22 so that they can learn from my mistake. But that's how every generation deals with the next generation.
True.
It's not necessarily a pragmatic approach. So is there a workable solution here?
Again, there's actual financial math here.
Yes.
So what you need to do is just ask yourself, saying that, okay, so let's say I need to, collect a certain amount of money, and it's going to take me 10 years to get there. Let's say it's 2,000 rupees. I get a 12% return every year. I'm going to get 10 years to get to a certain number. Now, if I'm able to get to that same number by increasing my savings from 2,000 to say 5,000, and therefore get there in 6 years instead of 10 years, now this math becomes digestible, because you're now saying that I have 4 years of my savings shaved off. And what's my trade-off? That 3,000 rupees which I would have spent on something today, which probably may not have that same value. And therefore, the way to typically deal with one kind of math is to introduce another kind of math, because it's when the logic works with the logic. And that's why I keep saying that, you've got to find the balance between putting away some money of yours in some investment tool. SIPs work beautifully just because they discipline you to do that, especially at the start of the month, before you get to spend anything else, let that go off. And then you spend the rest of the money doing your own math in your head.
Yeah, on that note, Vishal, thank you so much for joining in and for speaking to me. I hope that this conversation helped you either understand how people younger than you think of money, or if you are in that age group, think of how you might want to balance the two. And trust me, no judgment. It's your money. You do what you want with it. On that note, thanks so much for watching. This is NDTV Profit.